How do the soils of Germany change the expression of Riesling in your glass? What would surprise you about the size and nature of German wine production in relation to other leading wine-producing countries? And how is climate change dramatically changing the way Germany cultivates vines? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in part 2 of our chat with Master of Wine Anne Krebiehl, author of The Wines of Germany. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but if you missed it, go back and have a listen after you finish this one. By the end of our conversation, you'll also discover why too much personality is a problem for Riesling, the ways in which wine is ineffable, love that word, indescribable, and how to trust your palate and follow your own inclinations no matter what people, especially experts, say. Okay, let's dive in. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my 3rd book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 296. One of you is going to win a copy of Anne Krebiehl's beautiful hardcover edition of The Wines of Germany that includes full-color photographs and maps. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy of the book. I'll choose one person randomly from those who contact me. All right, so yesterday was the official launch day for the audiobook of Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. You can now download it and start listening immediately on audible.com, which is owned by Amazon, Kobo, the audiobook partner for Chapters, Indigo, and Coles in Canada, as well as on audiobooks.com, Spotify, Google Play, Libro FM, and wherever else you get audiobooks. Part of the power of audiobooks, I believe, is tied into our earliest experiences of stories. Long before we could read, most of us experienced the magic of storytelling through listening. I recall the deliciously cozy feeling of being read to as a child. Audiobooks recreate that special experience of bringing stories to life in a unique way. As a child, it was the rhythm of words carried on the voice of someone we loved, and then our imagination was free to roam when our eyes weren't tethered to the page. Oral storytelling predates writing by thousands of years. Many of our most revered literary works began as oral tales, such as Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These oral traditions strengthen tribal bonds and help pass on generational wisdom to the young. When I meet the online trolls face to face in Wine Witch on Fire, my mother's calm voice reading The Wizard of Oz comes back to me. As a child, my heart raced when the great and terrible wizard was revealed as nothing more than a man without special powers. I'd rest my small hand on her forearm, the other on the open page, trying to absorb more of the story and her strength. So what happens next with those trolls? Well, you just have to listen to find out. If you started listening to the audiobook, please let me know. I am super nervous about how my voice translated to the narration of this book and would love to hear from you at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide for the audiobook, ebook, and paperback versions at nataliemclean.com/296. At the end of my interview with Anne, I've included part 3, the final part, of the bonus excerpt from the Writer's Workshop that I hosted recently. You can continue listening after our main wine-related interview or skip it. It's gravy, not the main meal. All right, on with the show. And you've described the country as all rivers and slopes. I'm sure it's hard to generalize, impossible maybe, but what are the major differences landscape-wise that you see with Germany? Maybe talk about the plantings and the steep terraces of, especially along the Moselle and other rivers.
The rivers and the slopes, decisive in German viticulture because before global warming, before climate change, Germany really was a marginal climate. And again, where would grapes ripen? On south-facing slopes. What creates a slope is a river that creates a valley. And in those valleys, you have slopes. And this is really, Baden is the southern part of the Rhine Valley, which then continues into the Pfalz. And in old nomenclature, it was known as the Rheinpfalz. Then comes Rheinhessen, so named after a river. Württemberg, region of Württemberg, is along the river Neckar and its tributaries. The Franken region is all along the river Main. And then there are regions that are named after river Mosel, Saar, and Ruhr, and Nahe, and the Rheingau. So you see the rivers and those south-facing slopes cannot be divorced from wine in Germany.
Right, absolutely. And they're stunning. I did visit Moselle, and it was just, it felt like the grapes were on a slope that almost went straight down. It wasn't a gentle slope at all. We're not talking rolling hills of Tuscany here. We're talking about cliff dives where if you lose your footing, you probably roll all the way to the bottom.
I tell you, this is vertiginous. And I know that word is sometimes overused, but it does apply. It is incredibly steep. Incredible.
Yeah. I forget who I was talking to, one winemaker. I said, what do you do as harvest ends? He said, we go down along the bottom, along the river, and we collect up all the grape pickers who've landed there. It's like, oh, that's pleasant. So there are 13 wine regions in the country. You've mentioned 103,000 hectares planted, or 255 acres, roughly speaking. Where does that put Germany on the world stage as a wine producer?
It's a fairly small wine producer and a niche wine producer. Again, I haven't refreshed my little tables of, where exactly it takes its place in the world, but it's actually not very big. If you think that in Champagne alone, you have like between 34 and 35,000 hectares. So that's more than a third of what you have in Germany, and that's Champagne alone. So it's actually not that much of Germany is under vine.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned, I think, in previous conversations that Bordeaux is bigger than all of Germany in terms of its production, that Germany just produces about 1% of the world's wines, and it's very fragmented because I think I'm just picking up some other stats that you've mentioned, 16,000 estates, and each of those are often only a half hectare to 10 hectares. So it's this multitude of little tiny estates, which in wine is great. It means artisanal, but also means confusing for someone trying to understand it.
And then many of them, and this is especially true for the south, say regions like Baden and Württemberg in Germany's south are dominated by cooperative winemaking. And while this in itself is not bad, very often that is a race to the bottom, where it actually makes me very sad when I go to Baden, when I visit my family, and I go to supermarket and I see liter bottles of wine, and a liter bottle traditionally in Europe is the cheapest wine, so it's not even filled in a 750 ml, it's in a liter bottle with 1,000 mils, and it costs like €4.50, because I know this makes Canadians' hearts bleed because there is so much excise duty, but in Germany you can buy wine very cheaply, but it's mass-made wine, sometimes grown on slopes that are very steep. And the price of what it is sold for doesn't really cover the cost of production. And in a country that should be making premium wines only because of the fragmented nature of these vineyards and the way Germany can't really compete in the cheap stakes just because there's so much regulation, etc., etc. And I don't know why they do it and they stick to it and until they die and go out of business. And it's terrible, in fact.
That is sad. And, with cooperatives, that's multiple grape growers sort of contributing grapes to one central winemaking facility, and perhaps they're all branded together under one label as opposed to single estates. And that's where you get that, as you say, race to the bottom, because they're very much all about cost and just big distribution, low cost.
There are fabulous examples in the rest of Europe of co-ops that actually play at the top. So it doesn't have to be that way. So that's why it makes me so sad, because you can actually play at a perfect league, or even at a league where you get proper money for your wine. It doesn't even have to be like that high, but it can just be at a normal level where you could have very decent, delicious, everyday wines and affordable wines that cover the cost of production.
Sure, understandable. Well, let's make you happy since you've turned to sad. Let's talk about Riesling, Anne, the country's flagship white wine, which ranges, of course, we've talked about this, bone-dry to dessert sweet. Germany produces 51% of the world's Riesling, followed by Romania and Washington State. Why is this grape seemingly so polarizing? People seem to love it or hate it.
So I have an answer for that. A, Riesling comes with more baggage than other grapes due to the German history. And, let's also face it, German history is not something that endears us to the world. So that's one aspect. The other thing is that people don't know when they buy Riesling, it's sweet, and they still think it's sweet. And every time somebody sees a flute-shaped bottle, they think it's sweet, which is not the case. But drilling down further, even with people who like and love wines, I have friends who won't drink Riesling. And I believe it is a very basic thing that our bodies tell us. So Riesling always has high acidity, whether it is bone dry or medium or off dry or sweet. Acidity is its defining feature. And your body decides whether you like that or not. And I think it'll never be everybody's darling. And, you can count it. Every few years, somebody will come up and predict a Riesling renaissance or a revival. And I actually don't think it'll ever happen because it's a beautiful niche and it's for freaks, despite the fact that it is incredibly delicious to me and to many other people. But it'll never have mass market appeal, probably because it has too much personality.
That's fascinating. I like so-called acid head. It's probably why I love Pinot Noir and Riesling. Love our acidity. I just think acidity is to wine as salt is to food. It just elevates or spotlights flavor. But why is it that you love Riesling so much and you write about it so lyrically, Anne?
Well, it's because, as you can probably tell, I'm an outspoken. I also like things I have a personality, so I like other things that have a personality. Nothing about me is namby-pamby. And I like raw garlic. I like black olives. I like anchovies in my food. I love champagne. I mean, wine is boring without acidity. And I like jumping into a cold pool in the morning. I just love that,
Yeah.
For me, the idea of going into a sauna I find that difficult, but going into a cold ocean, even if I go very slowly, I find it exhilarating. And so, in a way, I like that about Riesling. It is always exciting. And the other thing, because I've just spent 15 action-packed days in Austria, where the tastings always go like, okay, you start with Grüner Veltliner, and then you switch to Riesling. I was visiting estates in order to write tasting notes. And it happened just time and again that you go from Grüner Veltliner, which has a very different set of flavors and a different texture and is fascinating and it's very different. But then you switch from Grüner to Riesling and then somebody switches on that citrus verve. And, it goes from the entire citrus spectrum is covered from green lime via pale grapefruit, pale lemon, ripest Amalfi lemon, all through tangerine, all the way to sort of beautifully ripe clementine, and then sometimes even sort of blood orange. And I'm turned on by those flavors.
I love that color spectrum, the citrus spectrum you just described. Love that. I'm with you too. A sauna is more like Cabernet. Ocean spray for us Riesling lovers. You've also described Riesling as sort of a spotlight wine, transparent, crystalline. What do you mean? I've heard these terms for some other wines, but most often Riesling. What do you mean when a wine is transparent or translucent?
Well, translucent is a word I use a lot, also for Pinot Noir. Translucent in a white wine, of course, you might think if you take this literally, that yes, you look at a glass of white wine, of course you can see through it to the bottom of the glass. But what I mean is that there is nothing that is extraneous and masks the wine. So there, in Riesling, even if it has gone through malolactic fermentation, and many wines don't, and even if it has been fermented in aged wood, but particularly in stainless steel or in neutral wood, you are confronted with something that is almost naked. And when that wine comes from stony soils, that is even more so. And sometimes you feel you're drinking stone. And there is a clarity which is helped along by that acidity, because acidity to me is like a spotlight and there is no place to hide. And so in order to be good, the wine needs to be very clean. And what do I mean by that? It means that the flavors are direct. Just like when you have a lemon, there are Amalfi lemons in the south of Italy where you can even eat the peel. And the peel is not bitter, it's delicious. And you have that, or like lemon juice. When you taste that, there's nothing extraneous. It's aromatic and exquisitely pure. And Riesling is like that too, in the best cases. And I just love that. And it always has a fragrance without being blousy. So, but you asked me what is crystalline. So again, crystalline is a word that to me describes purity and clarity. And it's about this unmediated feeling of drinking something that's real.
And you've said you can smell the winemaking on Chardonnay in contrast, and you referred to malolactic fermentation, which of course is taking those harsh mallow acids and turning them into softer lactic acids. That sometimes happens or often happens with Chardonnays, and then oak treatment. Is there anything else that's really pokes out at you in terms of the key differences between, say, Riesling and a typical Chardonnay?
Well, of course, my own inclinations and my physical inclinations, which I think is something that your body decides. You don't decide. You can't decide what you like. We go for something because we are inclined to be, and for me, that was always Riesling. However, having said that, I have tasted numerous Chardonnays that are also crystalline, that are also very pure, where you can taste the pure stone. And while I don't drink a lot of still Chardonnay, I absolutely adore sparkling Chardonnay. I love Blanc de Blancs. Again, because I get that kind of acid, I get that kind of clarity, despite sparkling wines being, of course, very made wines, because they've gone through more processes, but they can still preserve that same kind of purity for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about the different soils in which Riesling thrives, especially in Germany, the granite slopes of the Black Forest, the slate in the Moselle, the limestone in Franken. How do these soils change the expression of Riesling in the glass at kind of a high level for you?
Well, it is difficult to put this into words, but putting this into words is my job. And yet, I think Rieslings grown on slate have a very, very particular stony smell, often in combination with a herbal overtone. And they also have a different shape. I don't know. I mean, I am, as a person, am so primed to smell all the time, whether it is in the garden or on public transport, which can be horrible. But, like to me, smell is something that is very immediate. So I have to make myself think about the shape of the wine. And I actually find it is useful to think about the shape of a wine because it can be linear or it can be rounded or it can be kind of naked, or it can be softer. And I find that Riesling grown on limestone doesn't necessarily have a softer acidity, but it has a softer shape, and it always seems to ring with a certain coolness and depth, almost like a soothing, cooling feeling, whereas Riesling from slate is harsher. And it's, as you can see, it's very difficult to describe these things and sensations because sensations is what they are, and we only have kind of language to describe something that is also immensely personal. So, yeah.
That's true.
Wine is ineffable in the truest sense of the word, ineffable. Yeah.
It is. Wine succeeds where words fail often. Now, you classify Riesling as a semi-aromatic grape. What does that mean? And what are examples of other aromatic grapes? And how would that contrast? What is a fully aromatic grape? And are there any non-aromatic grapes?
So there is actually a categorization that isn't just made up, because grapes in their grape skins have compounds that are called terpenes. Now, terpenes are the fragrances of nature. So if you smell rosemary, for instance, or a pine branch, or strawberries, or many flowers, what you smell are actually terpenes. Like, for instance, right now in London, the linden trees, lime trees, are in bloom. And what you smell is a terpene. So that beautiful, gorgeous smell of linden blossom that only lasts for a week and a half and is just so delicious, that is a terpene. And also in citrus peel, when you peel your grapefruit or your lemon, what you smell are terpenes. And these terpenes are also in grape skins. And what is beautiful is that they survive that process of fermentation. And so it is the amount of terpene, whether a grape in those grape skins, whether a grape variety is classified as aromatic, semi-aromatic, or non-aromatic. And for instance, Chardonnay doesn't have that many terpenes, or Pinot Gris doesn't have that many, or Pinot Blanc, so they would be classed as non-aromatic grapes. Riesling is semi-aromatic, and so is, say, Chenin Blanc. But fully aromatic grapes are those where even in a grape that hasn't been fermented yet, even like if you have Gewürztraminer, which is so aromatic, even the grapes themselves taste delicious, because tasting Riesling grapes is actually not that exciting. It's the Riesling after fermentation that is exciting, but because the tasting Riesling or just freshly pressed Riesling is just incredibly sweet. But if you have, say, Muscat or Gewürztraminer.
Would Viognier be one?
Yes, Viognier is also higher, even though not as expressive as Muscat or Gewürztraminer, but those have incredible aromas. And eating Gewürztraminer grapes is totally yum.
Huh. Wow, but it's kind of robbing the cradle as well. Let those grapes be made into wine. Get your hands off them. But yeah, that's interesting because the terpenes, as you say, are natural molecular compounds or structures that they can be in the linden tree, but that same structure molecularly can be in the grape skins, which is mind-blowing. We're not adding limes or whatever, little droplets into the wine. It's there.
That's why I feel it's so legitimate for me to use that citrus spectrum to describe Riesling, because it's actually this is not fanciful. This is just biochemistry.
Yeah, absolutely. So Riesling loves a cool climate, as we know here in Canada. And how will climate change impact Germany's ability? You hinted at this earlier, but how will it impact Germany's ability to grow Riesling, or at least the same style of Riesling, or are just the techniques going to change?
Well, first of all, I have a lot to say. First of all, Germany is a winner of climate change because it used to be difficult to ripen grapes. And sometimes there would be only like 2 vintages or 3 vintages within a decade where grapes ripen. So far, climate change, Germany has been a winner of climate change because now there are no more vintages that don't ripen grapes. And just to put this into context, imagine you work your derrière off on a steep slope like that, and then your grapes don't even ripen. Imagine how awful that is, yeah? And that used to be the daily bread of many, many, many winemakers. And it's actually the poverty of many Mosel wine growers that inspired a very young Karl Marx. So he saw poverty, so just as a cultural aside, but now back to climate change. There are people, Germany will get too hot for Riesling. Now, I don't think so at all, because A, where have you been in the world? Have you ever been to Australia? So, duh. Then you must think that over the past 300 years of viticulture, it evolved. Everything you did in the vineyard was geared towards ripening your grapes, down to the selection of genetic material. You would plant your vines on a rootstock that would be able to deal with a lot more water than there is today. Then you would graft onto that rootstock a clone of something that would clog up sugar, that would get rid of its acidity, that would ripen within a certain time. And then you would put your vines into a trellis and remove the leaves, and you would plant them into the direction so they catch every last little ray of sunshine. Every single thing was geared to achieving ripeness. And now you just need to think, okay, how do I dial some of this stuff back? How do I shape my fruit? When do I prune? How do I prune? What is the shape of my canopy? The canopy are the leaves and the shape of the vine plant that also ripens its fruit. And so, there was ripeness was fetishized in Germany because it was so hard to ripen. People loved every little extra degree of sugar in those grapes. And I think a lot of the time, that entire discussion about climate change in marginal climates is just a lot of old codswallop because of course it's getting too bloody hot for Riesling in Germany if you did exactly what your grandfather did. But the adjustments need to be not only in viticulture, but down to the genetic material of the grapes, because there is grape material that doesn't clog up tons of sugar. There are mast-cell selections that retain acidity. And there are lots of things you can do to act in the vineyard, in your cultivation.
And maso selection, is that grape selection?
That would be a massal selection, would not be a single clone, but a collection, a genetically diverse collection of planting material. And I get very annoyed when even winemakers talk such crap, because there is a lot you can do. I'm saying this, fully acknowledging that climate change is the single most difficult challenge for viticulture across the world. But its solutions, it's not like, oh, it's getting too hot for Riesling, let's plant Chenin or let's plant whatever. That's the wrong approach and actually a stupid approach because the solutions are elsewhere.
That's an interesting perspective, and I agree. What about ice wine, though? It used to be 3 out of 4 harvests that they could make ice wine in Germany on average, I believe. Correct anything that's wrong here, but are they still able to make ice wine consistently or to that level every 10 years?
Well, I'm afraid I cannot verify any statistics because I have never looked at ice wine statistics and the frequency of when it was able to be made. But then there already were headlines like, oh, ice wine is a thing of the past. And then another bloody year rolled along with shitty frost, and there you were. So what climate change means is not that it's in one way, yes, it's getting progressively warmer, but it's also getting far, far more volatile. And yes, so you have frost. And actually, earlier this year, you had tremendous spring frosts that were just some of the worst frosts that you had since, in the past 40 years. So, no, spring frosts are still a risk. Ice wine is still possible. So I just don't want to, these are some lazy assumptions that people make and that lend themselves to some dramatic headlines. But please, think before you write.
True. Check your facts. My stats are out of date, but what I used to hear about 5 years ago is that Germany, on average, every 10 years would make ice wine every 3 to 4 years. I only know this because I've written about Canadian ice wine, whereas we were blessed with extreme cold year after year. We'd make it every year. I think that's still the case, but who knows what's happening lately. Now, we both share a passion for Pinot Noir. Why are you obsessed with it, Anne?
Because it was the first grape that I fell in love with. And because to me, it is an incredibly sensuous grape, and it occupies a place in the wine world that is unique because it doesn't conform to your usual red wine. And I love that. It has high acidity. It is beguiling in so many respects. It is never mouth-puckering because it's a very thin-skinned grape and therefore always has lovely tannin. And are some Pinot Noirs that are made like this, but they are not the ones that are my favorites. It's never a powerhouse. It's always something that is, to me, sensuous.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you've described it as psychoactive, I think, in one of your discussions.
Well, I think alcohol is a psychoactive substance.
It's true.
And so I would describe wine as psychoactive, but in a different way from other drugs. Because alcohol is a drug, is a poison, but it helps us relax. It helps us open up to a certain degree, and then it becomes too much. But we cannot deny the fact that wine occupies this very special place and is in a way a socially acceptable drug. And neither can we deny drunkenness or all the dangers that come from alcohol. But I think because wine was part of European civilization before distillation was known, and before beer became more widespread through the discovery of the preservative qualities of hops. And so wine occupied a very special place always because it was psychoactive and because there wasn't even an aspirin you could take to dull anything. And that's why in sort of pre-Christian times, alcohol was always part of the ritual. And then as Europe was Christianized, that came along with it. And actually, Gisela Krieglinger wrote an amazing book that traces the story of wine from its pagan taboo to its complete adoption and by Christianity, because of course we know that in Christianity, wine is the blood of Christ. And, so it goes from taboo to absolute sacred liquid. And that shows the importance of wine. And, wine always attracted taxation. Wine always attracted legalization, attracted legal regulation. And it had a place in ritual, and it now has a place in Christianity, a central place. And I think that is because it was one of the first psychoactive substances. And that's why it occupies such a special cultural place, because we humans change as we consume it. And, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Reminds me of that book by Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, except he's writing about drugs like LSD or something. But it is about
your mind on plants. Yeah, exactly. It's caffeine and what else? Yeah, but it's amazing. And I'm a great Michael Pollan fan. Yes.
Yes, Botany of Desire and The Omnivore's Dilemma. They're wonderful books for anyone who's wanting to trace the kind of food journeys. So I'll just summarize a little bit because the time is flying by and it's been awesome. But Germany is the third largest producer of Pinot after France and California. Of course, France not only has Burgundy, but also Champagne, where it's a big part of the blend. In Germany, it's called Spätburgunder. Is that correct?
Spätburgunder, yes.
Spätburgunder. What is that umlaut, those two little dots? How do we handle pronunciation when we see that?
So dots, these umlauts only exist for vowels. So A becomes E. I doesn't have an umlaut, but then there's O becomes Ö and U becomes Ü. It's just like accents in French. But Spätburgunder, Burgunder is the German name for Pinot. And so Spätburgunder means late Pinot because it's later ripening than its white cousins. And then Grauburgunder is Pinot Gris. And Weißburgunder is Pinot Blanc. And then there's also Frühburgunder, meaning early Pinot, which is that known in France as Pinot Madeleine, as a slightly earlier ripening mutation of Pinot Noir. It's also a red grape.
Oh, the Pinot family. And would you say that two of the underrated German grapes or wines are Silvaner and the Sekt, the bubbly, the German bubbly?
Oh, Silvaner is a specialty of Franken. And there's also a lot of it grown in Rheinhessen. And it's one of those former workhorse grape varieties that are like Cinderella. Once she gets to dress up and go to the ball, she will dazzle. And Silvaner is the opposite of Riesling because Riesling always has these aromas and the jazz hands. And, Silvaner is a lot more quiet, but just as expressive. And in the right hands is dreamy and gorgeous. It's a light-bodied white wine that can express where it came from very well, especially in Franken.
And you're also a fan, of course, of the German bubbly Sekt.
Sekt has a fabulous and illustrious history. Again, I know we're running out of time, but there are now great traditional method sects in Germany made from Riesling, which is some kind of USP for Germany, but then also made from Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And some of these wines are just gorgeous, gorgeous. And I drink a lot.
Is there anything you've discovered since that you'd add to a new edition of the Wines of Germany?
I don't know.
Maybe it hasn't been out long enough.
I could probably It came out in 2019, and there are, of course, the Germans are in the middle of changing their law. And I just dread even getting my own head around that again once they finalized it. And then I would probably be able to add different producers, and there's just so much there. And it's, So I'm stunted. I don't know.
Probably the new wine law, but that'll just give you a headache. So we'll get back to Riesling and happier topics. As we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention, Anne? Because I really appreciate your time with this. It's been a wonderful discussion with German wines.
I have spoken so much that my brain seems to be drained of oxygen. and
I think you need a drink.
Yes, I think I do. And I'm very happy to report that I've got some Austrian sect and some French champagne chilling.
Excellent.
Because it is,
Friday evening your time.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's great.
It's Friday. It's the weekend. And the weekend will begin very soon because I've had a tough and hard week. Yeah, so what do I want to say to people who actually tune into a wine-related program, whether they listen to it or whether they watch it, is just trust your own palate and follow your own inclinations, no matter what people say, because no matter where you look in the wine world, there are things of joy and beauty. And we only need to look at the news to see what kind of weirder world we're living in. And probably the goddesses have given us wine so that we can,
cope.
Cope and enjoy actually learn something about those beautiful places around the world.
Absolutely. Yes. And where can people find you and your book online, Anne?
It's on Amazon. It has the very imaginative title of The Wines of Germany.
That's good for SEO.
And I am on social media as Anne Krebiehl. Yeah, so I should be easy to find.
Absolutely. And we'll put links in the show notes for how to reach you. And I want to say thank you. Goodbye for now in terms of wrapping up this conversation. I loved it. I hope that we can share a glass of Riesling or Pinot Noir or both next time in person. But thank you so much for this.
Well, thank you, Natalie. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Anne. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, how do the soils of Germany change the expression of Riesling in your glass? Those vines that grow on slate, Anne explains, have a very particular smell, often in combination with an herbal overtone. Limestone, however, has a softer shape. It brings a certain soothing coolness and depth, she says, whereas Riesling grapes grown on slate are harder or harsher. It's difficult, she believes, to describe these things as sensations, because sensations is what they are. Wine for her is ineffable in the truest sense of the word. Number 2, what would surprise you about the size of German wine production in relation to other leading wine-producing countries? Well, Anne notes that Germany is surprisingly small on the world scale of wine production. In Champagne alone, there are about 35,000 hectares. That's a third more than what is planted in all of Germany. And number 3, how is climate change dramatically changing the way Germany cultivates vines? Germany is a winner in climate change, Anne says, because it used to be difficult to ripen grapes. Sometimes there would be only 2 or 3 vintages within a decade. Now the grapes ripen in every vintage. She believes that the discussion about climate change, however, especially in marginal climates like Germany's, is outdated and simplistic, such as, it's getting too hot for Riesling in Germany. That's only if you assume that modern winemakers are using the exact same viticultural techniques of their grandparents. The adjustments are not only in viticulture, but also in the genetic material of the grapes. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of my conversation with Anne, links to her website and books, the video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live, and where you can order my book online now, no matter where you live. You can also find a link to take a free online wine and food pairing class with me called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever at nataliemclean.com/class. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/ 296. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or would like to win a copy of Anne's book, The Wines of Germany. I'd also love to hear from you if you read my book or are listening to it at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. If you missed episode 201, go back and take a listen. I chat about Riesling, that 4-octave diva, with author Valerie Cathawala. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
Riesling can do everything. People need to stop talking about it in a defeatist way and talk about it as the world's great white wine.
You call it a 4-octave diva. Are you referring to the stylistic range from bone dry to sweet to all kinds of textural things and weights?
Right? Depending on where it's grown, how it's grown, it can be everything. It can be something dancing and lacy and sparkling. It can be something unctuous and serious that needs 30 years of age. You can even make an orange wine out of it, and you can play with its tannins in various directions. So I'm a big believer. It would definitely be my desert island one.
And now here's the third and final part of the bonus excerpt from the writer's workshop I hosted recently. We explore topics such as mistake number 5, getting sued by friends, family, and others for defamation, invasion of privacy, or copyright infringement. That is just not fun. We also explore what should you think about when writing the comp section, comparative titles of your book proposal, and which factors you should consider when deciding where to start your memoir. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Matthew Goffin about the trends and changes in Ontario wines. If you liked this episode or learned even one thing from it, please email or tell one friend about the podcast this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in learning more about the wines of Germany. It's easy to find my podcast. Just tell them to search for Natalie MacLean Wine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemaclean.com/podcast. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps an ineffable German Riesling. Mistake number 5 is getting sued by friends, family, and others for defamation, invasion of privacy, and copyright infringement. This is a question I get asked a lot. So a few things to keep in mind. Heroes versus villains. No one's a hero. No one's a villain completely, except that everyone is the hero of their own story. So when you are talking about people that you may think of as the villain in your story or someone who may have wronged you, see if you can find some positive things about them, or at least one positive thing. This is not to create false equivalency. This is to create characters that are believable and to make you, as the narrator, more credible and to get the reader on your side. Because if you say bad, it's just, again, lacks credibility and you will not have the reader on your side. So just think about that. At first, we write heroes and villains and heroes and villains, but then we need to get much deeper than that and say, my villains have really outstanding traits that are admirable, business savvy, charisma, whatever it is. My heroes, and me especially as the narrator, has some pretty serious flaws as well. Give grace to all of the characters in your book, the people in your book. Notice I say characters. They're real people, but you have to think about that. I told my partner, you're becoming a real character in my life. And he just rolled his eyes at me. It was like, okay, yeah, all right, you're into it. Give the grace and the benefit of the doubt if you want it yourself. I always think they were doing the best they could with what they had or knew at the time. That doesn't mean we forgive egregious behavior, crimes, things that are unethical, but we step back and think, I'm human. I've done things that I'm ashamed of for reasons that people did not understand. Could that be possibly true with other people? There are always rewards for a bad situation, for staying in a bad marriage, for doing all sorts of things. So again, it's not the black or the white, it's all the shades in between where we find humanity. At the same time, you don't need to take too much responsibility. There's points in my book where I think, what if I did this and this? The trolls they would have been satisfied. Would they? Really? And the false equivalency that two-side-ism, you're not doing journalism in a memoir, you're telling your story. So you do not have to be completely balanced as you would in the New York Times or the Globe and Mail. Be toughest on yourself. It's not a masochism, but it's your story. You also have the power of the pen, of course. Be most self-critical because the reader will get the most out of that. But also in the end, the reader will be on your side. Do not worry. Don't mind read other people or impute intentions. Don't editorialize about others. Why did I think they were doing that? Don't bother with that. You can quote what they said, you can say what they did, and it's far more credible and tighter writing than saying, he was so callous to do this and that. How about just saying what he or she did? And then maybe how you felt, but not the editorializing. Avoid labels like cruel or emotional abuse. They can have legal implications. Here's a really nifty trick that one of the lawyers taught me. I had 2 legal reads. He said, instead of saying, she made me feel terrible, slight rephrase, I felt terrible when she did this. No one can argue with your feelings. It's a slight difference, but it's legally better. It's more powerful when readers make their own conclusions or draw their own conclusions. This is the show tell. My ex-husband shifted the child support payments from my bank account being automatically deposited into my teenage son's bank account without telling me. I did not editorialize. I'll let the reader come to their own conclusions about what that behavior says. Tell the truth. The truth as you understand it. Acknowledge when you're fuzzy or if someone recalls it differently. You can say, I don't quite remember this, but this is how I think it happened. That's okay. You don't have to have everything locked down. It provides balance and credibility and humanity. We're all human, just doing the best we can. Don't tell someone else's story. People are only involved in your memoir to the extent where they intersect your story. You don't go any further. You don't say, oh, and he was the product of an orphanage. That doesn't need to be in the book. Only to the extent you intersect. And they can write their own memoir. Change names, physical characteristics, and company names. Change them all. Be one layer removed because you don't know what will happen in the future. I had a little Easter egg. I had hints, but I did not outright say it, about my ex-husband and a relationship that I did not know for sure he was having. But I gave her flaming auburn hair and eyes of emerald green, like the Jolene song by Dolly Parton. So you can go listen to that. Compressed timelines and composite characters are always debatable in memoir. I think you can up to a point, as long as it doesn't really mess around with the facts. Again, this is not autobiography. So if you want to tighten the timeline, or if it's a minor character, you have 3 friends and they're not best friends, and you just don't want to have the reader going, I'm trying to keep track. Is it Lily or Francine or who said that? I do believe that a certain tightening of timelines and characters can be done without sacrificing the truth. Always put an author's note or disclaimer. It will not protect you from lawsuits, but it will help. That note at the beginning. This is the best of my memory. All the rest of it in my book, you can find mine. I reworked it 27 times, but it's important. Get a legal read, even if your publisher won't pay for it. I got 2. I can recommend a great lawyer, by the way. Here's the thing that came out of that. So I've been naming them trolls. So I was quoting what these men were saying online, which had a lot of sexual description of me as a woman, and misogyny was baked right into everything they were saying. So I was quoting them, and I had changed their names because I thought, don't feed the trolls, don't give them more attention. But the lawyer said, if you're going to quote what they said online or anywhere, you have to use their real name or you're violating their copyright. I thought, oh my God, okay. But in the end, I came to the conclusion that they deserved full credit for what they did and said. So I named them, but not all family and friends. All right, next. This is Anne Lamott's phrase, Bird by Bird, one of the books I recommend. If you wanted me to say something nice about you, you should have been nicer to me. I love that. Anyway, people debate back and forth. Should I publish? Should I say this? Should I? You have to debate, or you have to come to a conclusion, how big your why is, how important this story is to you, how big your brave is. And I'm not saying you're a coward if you don't tell your story, because maybe it's not a safe story to tell. But you have to weigh this. Is telling your story bigger than your fear of the fallout? Or think ahead to how you'd feel years later not publishing it. So you have to weigh those things off for yourself. What do you expect readers to take away? That was in the book trailer video. For me, it's a piece of themselves better understood. Dry extract is a winemaking term. It's when wine is boiled down to its essence, all the moisture is evaporated. It's the extract. And I think that's in us as humans when life boils us down to our essence. And I love this quote, and it really applies to memoir. In the end, we're all just walking each other home. We often say, feel less alone, memoirs, but I love this quote. And then I have a few books, courses, and resources. Save the Cat, The Story and the Situation, they're very different for memoir. It's a great book by Vivian Gornick, Bird by Bird. Wired for Story by Lisa Cron. The Art of Memoir, Mary Carr. Oh my gosh, she's fabulous. The Memoir Project, Marion Roach also teaches courses, has a fabulous podcast. Jane Friedman has really amazing workshops. They're only about $25.
That was great, Natalie. Thank you so much. We already have a question in the chat.
Right.
And the question is, the mistake of 5 meant to be changing the names or for not changing them?
Okay, mistake number 5. So I had several slides under mistake number 5. Mistake number 5 was getting sued. So one of the tips is to change the names of all your friends and family. Even if they're fine with being in the memoir, it's one layer of removal. Yes, people can Google and find out who my husband was, whatever, but it's one layer and most people won't. Even though mom loved the book, it's dedicated to her, people can start to make the network connections of who's who. So I do advise changing everybody's name, except for people that you are quoting on the public record, like on a website or in a magazine or in a book. If you're using quotes like that aren't just friends and family, and you're concerned about copyright, then you need to quote the person's name and publication.
Okay. There is another question by Robin who says,
Yep.
I'm curious to know more about how you wrote your comp section of your proposal. I really liked your style.
Oh,
there.
it was at the beginning of the project, so I was still feeling around for what is this book. So I put it like they were all meeting in a bar, all the books and talking to each other. But the comp section was a little bit more meaty than that. And that's just one section of a book proposal. There's a course you can take called Book Proposal Magic. She has an amazing course. Linda, forget her last name.
Thank you, Natalie. Jill has a question. Jill, did you want to ask it?
I do. Thank you. Thank you for this, Natalie. I typed so fast to try and write down everything you said. Natalie, I am writing a memoir that is looking at 2 different the same core. So part 1 is I'm going blind,
Okay.
and how I have to adapt to a whole new way of doing things as my vision gets worse. The other side of the coin is what I didn't expect. I would be going blind, but I didn't expect how differently people would treat me when they saw my white cane.
Wow.
I didn't expect to be assaulted as often as I'm assaulted.
Ugh.
And so it's not a bad thing happens. This is how I learn and grow.
Right.
It's a bad things keep happening.
Oof. Yeah.
And I am struggling with, I don't want to be repetitive. I don't want to lose the reader going, we get it. You keep getting assaulted. And so I'm really struggling, and I'm wondering if you have some advice.
Wow. That is a challenge. What a great story, though. You have a hook. You have a strong, like the story and the situation there. I guess maybe you want to decide what your time frame is, because as I said, a memoir is a slice in time. So
Yes.
usually it's about a year or maybe 2 years. So you want to say, okay, put a container on it. So the assaults might continue, and that's fine, because as I said, you don't need to end up with a nice shiny red bow and everything's happy now and everything's fine. It's not. You still are getting assaulted, sadly. But there's the story of you going blind and adapting, and then the first assaults or whatever, and how you had to deal with those. And then perhaps after that, it's okay. And then I have to deal with this ongoing the time frame could be the container for it. I don't know if
Yes,
that makes sense.
that does.
Okay. Because you have to end it somewhere. As I said, it's really unfortunate that it continues, but you're probably better equipped to deal with it. So you have changed. People are looking for the transformation.
Yes.
The first thing that happened to you is, oh my God, I'm going blind. And then you have to deal with that. And then you have to deal with, oh my God, I've been assaulted and I've been assaulted again. What are the tools and reflections and strength that you gain? Even though it continues to happen, you're better able to deal with it now. And let's put some time bumpers on it.
Okay. The other big encouragement I took from your talk tonight was how much of this is creative nonfiction, because I don't want to drag the reader through the fact that it took years and years and lots of therapy to come up with tools for what do I do when I'm assaulted and how do I respond and whatever. And so I can be creative.
Yeah, and compress the timeline.
Press the timeline.
You want to have a few therapy sessions in there. I did in my book. They all didn't happen so neatly.
Yes.
But people understand that. And it doesn't really make a difference if the therapy happened over 6 years. To me, it doesn't. I'm fine with that. What I want to learn is your story and what you did with it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Thank you, Natalie. I think Nevin, did you have a question for Natalie?
I put a little comment when you were talking about not making people completely evil. Don't do a Nancy Drew novel.
Yes.
Nancy Drew, yeah.
Yep.
And if Nancy Drew doesn't like someone, person doesn't like Nancy Drew, that's the villain.
Exactly.
And the question I asked is for places. I usually use the rule that if a place is well known, like Toronto, you can use it.
Yeah.
Other than that, you need to change the name of the place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good rule of thumb, especially if you're talking about a small town where everybody knows everybody. It all depends on your story and how pivotal the details are. Like, yeah, I like that. Toronto's a huge place and there's so many different neighborhoods. You can still be anonymous in a big city. But I agree with you, Nevin. And with the heroes and villains, it's just, the whole like Nancy Drew, it's either you're a good guy or bad guy. It just, real life isn't like that. So it's good to blend.
Thanks, Nevin. So we have Pearl, who is asking if you can read a short excerpt, about 5 minutes. I think that would be great. I'm not sure we have the time for that, though. It's up to you. It's up to you, Natalie, or...
You know what? I would love to do that. I was just mindful of your time. If we want to take any other questions first, and then I'll read the excerpt, but people can feel free to go. Maybe leave the excerpt to the end.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, and okay. I'd love to squeeze one in there, actually. You mentioned that you started your memoir in 3 different places, which I find fascinating because a lot of times I think the big challenge is where exactly do I start? Yeah. And so you chose 3, and then you said your editors picked 1. Did I hear that correctly, or did you go with all 3?
So this is while I was struggling to write it, even before I started to get into developmental edits, which is your first type of edit. The third one was what I was reading. Like I was going to start off with, bang, I get this email. Oh my God, I'm a thief. And then, no, I have to back up. So that was the third one, was backing up, save the cat first, then go to and then continue, then back up the timeline. But the other 2 were just, do I start with, at first, we were going to start with getting back on the dating scene, because the beginning of my year chronologically was my husband of 20 years asking for a divorce, and I felt blindsided. So do I start with where I get back on the dating scene? Because that section is very funny, and it's lighthearted, and it's almost chick lit, and it's the Sex and the City stuff, but it's not the actual heart of the book. And if someone starts there and then they go down this sort of dark tunnel, it's what happened. So like we were thinking, do we ease people into it? Is that better marketing wise? But it wasn't the A story. The A story was what was happening online, my career and so on. The B story was the divorce and dating again and all the rest of it. So that was the second place I started. And then the third place I started was going on the social on CTV, because I'm a regular for their wine expert segments, and going on TV, knowing that the trolls could attack me, because back then, and I don't know if they do it as much anymore, but they would run live Twitter feeds. It was a live show nationally. And so that scene is still in the book, but it's not number one. So we had to play like, why would we start here? Why would we start there? What is this book about? Because you will work the most on your first chapter and your last chapter in any book. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's what we were struggling with and the reasoning we went through why this one, not that one.
That's very helpful, actually. Thank
Okay,
you.
good.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Yeah, thank you. Big thank you to Natalie for such an incredibly informative and educational evening and fun. For those of you who want to stick around, yeah, Natalie, why not?
Sure. And if I didn't get to your question, just email me, natalie@nataliemclean.com. The one part that I didn't get to, and since you're all so patient, I'll read you the final scene. You have to have the background a little bit of reading the book to know the stakes. But on social media, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of it is, as I say, keyboard courage. People say and do things they would never say and do in person. And meeting these people in person was just, anyway. Maybe I'll read that part where I go there, because this is, I believe, the climax of the book, which is like the turning point of almost like the resolution. So it's called Behind the Curtain. The Wizard of Oz is woven through the story a lot, along with witches. To me, witch is a strong woman who's gone through the fires of life and emerged stronger, wiser, fiercer. She's not just a bitter old woman who drinks a lot of wine and owns a lot of cats. This chapter is called Behind the Curtain. "Don't go," Daniel said softly. He put his arm around my shoulders. We stood on the back deck in the April sunshine, breathing in the fresh, green spring air. It smelled like everything could start over. I had mentioned I was thinking about attending a large tasting in Toronto in a few weeks' time. The men who had attacked me on social media 4 months before would likely be there. I'd never met any of them in person. Daniel didn't want me to face more harassment. The mob's maelstrom had subsided only a couple of months earlier. I still had the heart murmur. I developed a heart murmur in response to this, and a constant dread every time I went online. Should I even return to that hostile world? Sometimes I still thought I should go back to the safety of marketing at a packaged goods company. Then I remembered what I'd lose, the freedom I found working for myself, the natural high of writing, and my love of wine's sensory delights beyond the buzz. Running away from the wine world was also an unnecessary defeat. After all, I'd survived. The voices of Mum and her teacher friends singing Helen Reddy's I Am Woman came back to me. She was a school teacher, single parent, so they would have parties every Friday night in our trailer because she didn't want to hire a babysitter. So I'd hear them singing I Am Woman. At the beginning of the book, I say, I am woman, watch me pour. These men had bent me, but they did not break me. Since the attacks, many women in the industry had privately shared their own experiences of sexism. What I did now mattered as much for them as it did for me. If I don't go, then they're still bullying me. He sighed, go get him, tigress. I smiled tightly. My throat was dry at the thought of walking into that tasting room at the head office of the LCBO. I could barely swallow. I emailed Sherry Darling. She was a fellow wine writer, hoping that she was going to attend so I'd at least have one friendly face there. She couldn't make it, but sent back this story. When former disciples targeted Buddha in the temple one day, calling him names, Buddha did nothing and said nothing. The loyal disciple said, Buddha, they were yelling at you and showing you disrespect. Why did you let them do it? You did nothing. You let them get away with it. Buddha said, if they had come with a basket of oranges, a gift that I did not accept, what then? The disciple said they would have had to leave with their oranges. And Buddha said, exactly. They came with their abuse, they stayed with their abuse, and they left with it. I do not accept it. This helped, but I still imagine walking into that room, their heads turning, their eyes narrowing. What would they say? It's Friday morning, the day of the tasting. I get out of the taxi and walk across a busy parking lot. Delivery trucks back up and beep. The concrete LCBO office is penitentiary gray. Inside, security buzzers go off, doors slam. I'm thinking LA. What is it, that LA law thing? Boom, boom, whatever it was. Law and Order. But it's trying to show, not tell, right? Anyway, I check in with the gruff guard at the front desk who asks for ID, then pushes the sign-in sheet toward me. I see the names of 7 of the men who had been vicious online. My heart lurches. I'm about to walk into a hellish furnace, the real-life version of the comments section. The guard gestures upward, mumbling, 4th floor. I want to drag him with me as a bodyguard. I get into a small creaky elevator, a metal coffin. On the 4th floor, I walk down a long hallway. When I grab the doorknob to the tasting room, it just spins. My hand is slippery with sweat. I wipe my palms on my pants, then use both hands to get it open, and I slide into the room. There they are. There are 13 men, no women. I recognize these men from their social media profiles. As I look around at them, I remember their malicious comments, each one a knife wound. Mr. Wikipedia, by the way, this guy created a Wikipedia page about me. He was a former journalism professor who put all of this stuff in and then summarized my career in 2 sentences. Mr. Wikipedia, Dean Tudor, seemingly made of gristle, with a gray mustache and beard, is a few feet in front of me. Across the room, Master Sommelier John Szabo wears a buttoned-up waistcoat, similar to his Twitter picture, in which he's emerging from a red sports car. In the corner is Michael Pincus with an intense black-eyed stare. I breathe in slowly. They're smaller than I imagined them. Or am I just taller than I thought I was? Mom's calm voice reading The Wizard of Oz comes back to me. My heart raced when the great and terrible wizard was revealed as nothing more than a man without special powers. I'd rest my small hand on her forearm, the other on the open page, trying to absorb more of the story and her strength. Now I feel the strength of my own story. I pull myself up to my full height as the famous line from the movie echoes in my mind. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The online curtain has been pulled back. I stand face to face with those whose voices had boomed on social media like angry giants. Now that they can't hide behind their online avatars, they're silent. I imagine @ symbols on their foreheads like bullseyes. Where is their keyboard courage? Pincus looks up, then away. Tudor coughs, or did he catch his breath? Szabo seems to choke on his tasting sample. Am I blushing? When I'm stressed, I turn deep red because I have rosacea. When I drink wine or even taste it, it makes it worse. I end up looking like a radioactive lobster. Whatever. Let my face show my fire. I stay inside the room for a few agonizingly long seconds, not dropping my gaze. I will not scurry in. I have the urge to click my heels 3 times. One by one, they drop their gaze. They can't look at me, it seems, much less say anything. As they lose their voices, I get mine back. The white walls of the room are lined with a tasting counter holding some 70 bottles, a backup infantry standing shoulder to shoulder. I walk over to an empty space and start tasting, quivering with relief. It's quite a lineup we have here, I say to one man who wasn't involved in the online fracas. Yep, a new vintage of sour grapes. He smiles back at me. See, no, he said. That's getting rid of your dialogue tags. As the day goes on, there are a few whispers. I overhear one grump muttering to another. I guess life goes on. Indeed it does, gentlemen. Tudor is making his way down the line of bottles toward me quickly because he isn't spitting or taking notes. Szabo had tweeted at him after a previous tasting, saw you guzzled 2 glasses of Krug, an expensive champagne, on your way out of the tasting room. Some writers missed a chance to taste it. Please forward your notes. At last, he gets to the bottle between my laptop and the wall. He pauses, coughs. It's impossible to get it without asking me to move. I stay put, even though I've tasted all the wines in that area. He coughs again, walks over to another section of the counter, then returns to where I am. Cough. His throat must be getting very sore. I hold my ground. He moves away to another section to taste. This is the former journalism professor who had been so bold in writing the defamatory Wikipedia page, then bragging about it to his buddies. He's the one who had fearlessly characterized me as a leather-bound dominatrix, urging male critics to ejaculate. Now he can't even ask me to move down one spot on the counter. Social media had given these men their courage, but when faced with the reality of the woman they attacked, they are silent. As I continue tasting the wines, they keep shrinking in my mind. Why had I been so afraid of them? I'd stayed awake nights thinking of what they'd say next. Why hadn't I been able to see them for who they were, or who I was? Then I remember my favorite scene in The Wizard of Oz, but I imagine the good witch Glinda is talking to me. You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself. Anyway, that's not the end of the book, but that's near the end. That's climax.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, Natalie. Thank you so much. I think from all the applause that's coming, everybody, you've got some kudos coming in on the chat. That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And again, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here, happy to help with resources or whatever. I know it can be a lonely journey, but I'm happy to share what I've learned.
Thank you so much for your time, for your generous back and forth, and for sharing all your stories with us. It sounds fabulous. And hopefully we'll be seeing you again soon.
Yes, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you for listening.
Natalie, you're terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. All right. Cheers. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.